Welcome back to the kitchen. This time we are doing the crown, which will take care of basically the rest of the trim in the three rooms: the kitchen, the pantry, and the breakfast nook. And then it's time to paint everything, which should be a whole heck of a lot of fun. So you can see I've already made the crown. We're going to take a look at that first. We'll head down to the shop, get all this made, and run through that process real quick, and then we can start on the actual install. Back in episode 66, when I made the crown for the sunroom, I covered this crown profile and the process in a fair amount of detail. So if you haven't seen that video already, I definitely recommend going back and taking a look at that for some added context to this segment, because I'm going to be mainly just showing how I am doing this differently this time based off of what I learned from my experience last time, which was my first time making crowns. So this is now my second time. So the biggest thing is last time we used Donovan's, Williams, and Hussey molder to do the entire crown, the back cuts, and the face. And this time I am going to be using the table saw as much as possible to make this go a lot faster and a little bit more easily. So I'm using the table saw first to cut all my blanks to width, and then we'll get into the first back cut. The spring angle on the crown is 42 degrees, so the blade here is tipped to 42, and I'm running the boards through. You can contrast this to the way I did this last time with the two-piece back cutter set. This is the cut that would be run vertically through the molding machine, and after having used the two-piece back cutter set, other than you can use the same back cutters for a different width crown, I'm not really sure why this would be any better, because this first back cut, if you do it on the machine, you have to run the boards vertically because they expect you to plane the boards to width as you're making that first back cut, which I'm not really sure what use case there would be where you'd want to do that. I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of, but I don't really know. And this kind of brings me to the first point of contrast with these two kind of processes, is that the molding machine is extremely versatile. You can do so much with it, but that's also kind of its weakness in my mind, because it's just an open platform and you have to make all of your own work holding things. In the case of like even this back cut, you have to make a tall fence to ride your workpiece against, and you have to make sure that that fence is set in the right position to actually put that back cut in the right place. So the biggest downside to using the molding machine is you have to have, like, I think last time I had 6 extra pieces of stock that I use just for setup, because once you start feeding the piece in, there's really no stopping it. So you kind of feed one piece in. If it's in the wrong place, if it's too far in the wrong place, that sample board is now in the trash and you grab another one. But the setup on the molding machine is way more work than it is on the table saw, where you just slide the fence over and you can kind of line things up by eye. You can start the cut a little bit and stop just to see where it kind of lines up and adjust the fence on the fly. The setup is just a lot more convenient on the table saw, for at least for the back cuts. So that is the first back cut, and then now for the second back cut, that is the one that's going to go against the ceiling. That is 48 degrees, so in order to do that, we need to run the board vertically over the table saw. And this is the one that I wasn't too sure would be that easy to do on the table saw, because you need to have a really good way of holding that thing down to the table so it does not lift or wobble or anything, because that's going to impact the accuracy of that angled cut. Fortunately, it's worked out really well. I have the power feeder set up basically as just a big hold down. I don't have it applying a whole lot of pressure down to the board. It's really just there to make sure that the board does not rise up. And then the magnetic feather board on the table is enough to keep the board pressed against the fence. And the only kind of downside here is that the power feeder does not have enough down pressure to effectively feed the board, but I can very easily just kind of guide the board through. And it was, again, a much easier and faster thing to set up and run on the table saw than it was on the molder. Now with the two back cuts done, I can move on to the face cut. And this is another thing where I had some issues last time with the molder, and that is these knives are so big and that they protrude below the feed rollers. So there really is like, you can't take a small pass on the first cut, and the molder did not like that first cut. I had to run that thing so slowly that it was basically painful to stand there watching it chewing through all that material that it was feeding so slowly. So I'm using the dado stack to just bulk out a whole bunch of waste out of that cove. So that let me go over to the actual molder with the crown knives. I don't have as much material that I'm asking the molder to remove, and I can definitely run this thing through on that first pass a lot faster. With all the prep work done, now I can move on to the molding machine, get the knives loaded in, and then get it set up to actually run the profile. One thing I'm doing here is because I've run this before, I have a scrap piece of the old crown that I can use to get my fences set up. So I just have the piece of crown sitting there on the table, and I will move it left to right so the knives align to its existing profile, and then I can install the fences tight to that sample piece of crown. And that saves me a lot of setup time moving those fences left to right to get the profile to align perfectly onto my blank. That first cut went a lot more smoothly like this, so I'm really glad that I bulked away the majority of that waste on the table saw first. The molding machine was much happier about making this cut. Now on to the subsequent passes through the machine to get the profile down to its final depth. That's where things get a little more interesting or a little more challenging with this machine and this profile. And the biggest challenge with this profile is that it is different thicknesses at the top than at the bottom. So once you make that first pass, the rollers stop having even engagement on the left and right, and that difference in height causes the rollers to only contact on one side, causing the whole profile, the whole blank inside the machine to want to roll up into the cutter head on the top of the profile. So I tried several things to help with this situation. First thing I did is I adjusted the spring tension on the rollers. So on the right side, the side that's feeding the bottom of the profile, I loosened the tension up all the way. And then on the other side, that's feeding the top of the profile, I tensioned that one all the way down. So in theory, that would angle the rollers a little bit, and that kind of helped a little bit. The other thing I did was add the complementary wedge to the fence that was holding the bottom of the profile, so that as this roller on this side is pushing down, it has something to solidly contact against, and hopefully it wouldn't cause it to roll as much. That did help a little bit as well, but in the end, the only thing that really mattered was having more down pressure. So I had to stand there like last time and actually hold the profile down to the table, applying more pressure at the top of the profile to counteract the roller, which is only making actual contact at the bottom of the profile. So just to make it a little more clear, there is the profile there. So if I put that down here like it's on the bottom of the table and you come in with a straight edge, if the rollers there are set parallel to the table, now look, they're already moved. You can see it only contacts up on here. If you actually apply downward pressure, it's going to cause it to roll. So that's what I'm dealing with the whole time. I'm holding this down to the table, and the roller is only actually contacting and feeding on this one little point right here. That's the biggest challenge with this profile. I think to actually make this, you need some kind of segmented like feed roller that had multiple like feeders that would push in different places, or even just another featherboard that just held the very bottom here of the profile down tight to the table to counteract the rolling force of this. So now we have our crown all painted and ready to go. So general idea for workflow is I'm going to put in the biggest pieces first, since those will use basically the whole stick, and then we can work down to some of the smaller pieces, trying to conserve length, because in theory I should only have one real splice, which is the long wall that has the entry door on it. Now I'm going to take a look at this run here first. That's going to be one of the long ones, and this one here. So this big corner here, and this is an issue that I knew was going to be here for a while. When I measured to make the uppers, I measured off of the countertop to the ceiling to kind of figure out where the ceiling was, so I can come down and get the right height for my backsplash tile. All that's to say is that allowed me to discover that the ceiling is not flat. So if you remember way back, the exterior wall of the house was right here. So right above my head is our beam, and then this wall here we added on. So everything from here to here is an addition, and what it looks like ended up happening is either the exterior wall was built too tall, this beam was set too high, or a combination of both, because my ceiling height is consistent up into the beam on both sides all the way back, and then when we get to the beam it jumps up a ½ inch and then kind of goes back to the exterior wall. So I have this weird jog in the ceiling that we'll have to deal with. So part of that now is that now that I actually have a piece of crown is getting it up there and seeing how bad it really is, and what we can do to kind of mask that. So there is this piece of crown is kind of sitting up here. It's supposed to have a 1-inch show onto the cabinetry. I think this piece of crown has a little bit of a bow in it, but if I hold it on there kind of at 1 inch, and I think I'll get some blocks or something in a second, but you can see how we're kind of touching here, we're good through here, then we get to right about here, which is where the beam is, we got this giant gap down there. With a couple of support blocks, flip this thing up into place. This is kind of what we get. A nice big gap. So let's run through a few of the solutions to this problem. First off, the first category would be to fix the ceiling, which is probably the best way to go. You could either float this down, which I think at a ½ inch thick of mud, I'd be worried about that cracking over time, or doing something like that over time, and that'd be a ton of mud up there. Probably a better thing to do for fixing the ceiling would be to actually remove this whole section of ceiling, fur it down, and then put a new piece of drywall up. So basically from where this row of pot lights are to this exterior wall, cut this whole section out, fur down the beam and the ceiling joist in here, put new sheetrock on, tape and mud all those seams, and make it look seamless again. It would probably involve also repainting the entire ceiling to get it all kind of looking nice and even. When I first saw this about 6 months ago, that was kind of in the back of my mind as the best option, but I really didn't feel like going backwards. I still don't feel like going backwards and making a huge mess up here of dropping all that drywall, so that was kind of off the thing in my head, figuring I can just fix it now with the trim, and we'll take a look at a few different ways that we can deal with this with the crown to hide that. So here's my little crown mock-up. This is the wall, this is the ceiling, so it goes like that. Just to make it easier, I'm going to lay it down here. So if I install the crown tight to the ceiling, you can see the gap here. This is the 1-inch line on top of those cabinets. So you could hide the difference there in this reveal here. I think you can be able to see that though as you look across the top of those cabinets. You'll see this reveal growing as you go to the right. The other option you could do is you could hold the crown down from the ceiling and leave a gap. If you wanted to do this, you'd probably want to gap all of the crown in the whole room, because it would probably kind of weird just having one section with a gap. So I'm not doing that either. Another thing you could do is you could change the spring angle on the crown, essentially roll it so you could mount it like this. You would probably want to plane this bottom corner off to get the sit a little bit better, but that's one way to hide it. Basically, it's made the crown taller and not protrude over the ceiling as much, which wouldn't be super duper noticeable. The other option is to add a filler to the top of the crown like this, and you can scribe this to the ceiling, and you can hide the imperfection in the ceiling in this filler. And you have two options for how to deal with this filler. You can leave it like this and paint it just like the crown, so you'll see this edge of the crown changing as you look across the wall. The other thing you can do to hide it a little bit is you can mask off that exact line and just paint that filler the same color as the ceiling, so it kind of blends in. You'll still have a shadow line there as you're looking at two different planes intersecting, but you can kind of hide it that way. Third way of dealing with this filler, which is the way that I was kind of leaning towards at first, would be to then hide this difference in this giant cove, something like that. So you're hiding the error of that ceiling in the profile, and I think that would be the least noticeable because you can hide all of this error in the cove. This cove is so big and it's a big arch that you won't really notice that it changes from one side of the room to the other. So before getting in here, this is what I was expecting to do or planning to do, but I think I'm going to try, or at least see if it's going to work out, to do a combination of things. So I think I can get away with hiding some of the error in showing more of the cabinetry. So if I even just take half of it, a 1/4 inch, and I set the crown up right there, I don't think you'll notice that difference. And then I can try and roll the crown into position. And in this case, since it's tapered from left to right or changes from left to right, it's actually going to be twisted and rolled into position. So I'm going to try and play with that, I think, first before I go through doing all the work of remaking or making custom profile crown for here. And that's all to say that I've kind of changed my mind on the what I'm going to do first in here. I think I'm going to set aside the two pieces to go here and kind of procrastinate a little bit on that. I'm going to start wrapping some of the rest of the room in the crown. I'm going to prep the outside corner units to go around the dishes hutch and the appliance garage. So I'll make those 3-piece units on the island and then set them in place. And we can do some of the more simple things in here, kind of get rolling on that. I want to get some of this out of the way before I potentially go on some kind of sidetrack adventure with these ones. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through and start making these units and doing some of the easy stuff and working my way around the room and reducing this pile to a smaller pile. So I feel like I've accomplished something in here before I go on potentially some kind of side adventure. I'm adding these blocks here to actually catch the top of it and give me somewhere to attach this thing up towards the ceiling. And I know there's been a few examples so far of things that kind of got missed during framing. And I guess, I don't know if I would call it a regret, but just like a annoyance is like, I really should have fully conceptualized all the details in here during framing, because I could have accounted for all these things and checked all these things back then. We could have checked the ceiling to make sure that was nice and straight. The walls we filled in, they're all kind of all over the place, so I had to shim out all the cabinets over there. Now this one here is probably the more like annoying one, because you know the ceiling joists are running this way. This little beam thing is sitting between a couple of ceiling joists, and we used drywall clips to catch the ceiling drywall as it came into this little tiny fake wall thing. And at the time, no one thought like, hey, well, if we're catching the drywall with clips, what are we gonna catch the crown molding with? It should have, this is an example, like it should have been super obvious. But instead of putting blocking in here, that would have taken a few minutes. I could have laid a 2x6 in, or I could have put any scraps just running between the joists. They're 12 inches on center, so you only need like a 10-inch piece to go between them all, and I wouldn't have to spend my time doing this now. Making all these blocks, using all of these 4-inch long screws, which are more expensive because if they're longer, and it's just, you know, I can make it work, but a little foresight in the beginning would have been really helpful. But I wasn't there with conceptualizing all this, so I don't necessarily blame myself. It's just annoying. I barely knew what was going on back then. All that stuff was new to me, so it is what it is. It's just another example of how you can save yourself a lot of trouble later on by just fixing things or doing them right in the beginning. But in order to do that, you kind of have to know what needs to be where, how right something needs to be. So here's where I'm at now. So I have basically wrapped all the way around here back to the great room. We got this cap piece on the appliance garage. And one thing that's nice now is I can finally see this detail here with the stopped bead on that casing and giving the crown somewhere to die into. I think that worked out really nicely. Over here in the breakfast nook, just put that one in. And this one, I think I'll prep that one next, and I won't install it until I get all the stuff out of here so I have room to work. But at least it's prepped and ready to go in. So I'll do that. And then I think in the interest of continuing to procrastinate, I'm going to come in here and just do the pantry. So I'm going to make this outside corner next, get that taken care of. From doing all this down here, I know the miter angle on this wall is 47 degrees. So this one's going to be a little different than all the other ones. These ones are kind of nice because it's all cabinetry that I made. So those corners are all 90. So I can cut all my miters at 45. This will be the first one that I cut at a miter angle that is not 45. So while this is sitting for a second, and actually while this is drying, I'll go ahead and I'll pre-cut and cope all the stuff in the pantry. But I wanted to just touch on one thing real quick with this particular one and why I like to cut my crown nested. It makes more sense to me. So this situation here, the crown I'm using is a 42 degree spring angle, and then this corner is 86 degrees. So if you want to cut that on the flat, you can do that, but then you have to use a calculator to figure out your bevel and your miter angles and change your saw to all those things, and hopefully don't put it in the wrong direction. The nice thing about this is it cuts just like any other piece of molding on a corner. If this angle wasn't quite right, I wanted to change it and sneak up on it, I could just change the miter angle a little bit to change that angle and adjust for the inaccuracies in that corner. So here's a calculator that I could have used to cut that molding on the flat. So you put in the spring angle and the actual wall angle you measured, and it'll tell you that in this case, I would have to set my miter angle to 35.7 degrees and my bevel angle to 32.9 degrees. You can do that. I just prefer not to, and this just works better in my brain. So now while I'm waiting for the glue to set, I can cut all of these, or at least these first three. They're going to have a cope on one end, and they're going to go square into the corner on that end. So the length is going to be this length here minus this little chunk here at the bottom, which is about 5/16. So I can deduct that off the total length, chop it to final length, and then cut my cope in. And then once I get this in here, I can slam them all in here. Okay, pantry is done. So now I can't avoid it anymore. I gotta deal with this and see what we're gonna do here. I don't think I mentioned it yet, but one of the, I guess, issues with choosing a direction is whatever you do here, you have to do here. Either you have to keep doing it all the way around, or you have to undo it as you come back into this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this and cut my cope on it, and we'll take a better look and see if we can hide this a little bit, see if we can get it to roll, see if we can fudge it up a little bit, see if that easy solution works. So here is it just sitting there with a 1-inch reveal like it's supposed to. So we get an idea of how it looks now. Don't mind that. The crown's got like a hockey stick shape, so that's gotta get pushed up into place, but I'm not worried about anything over there. One thing I want to point out, which I thought was kind of interesting, that I couldn't tell before I got a nice straight edge up here, is the beam is back over here, but it looks like the sudden jump happens right here. So I think what happened is that when this addition was built 15 years ago, when it was framed, I think like the last two joists, the last joist and then the rim joist, were set too high. So the ceiling always had this sudden rise right at the edge. So then when we added our addition on here, we aligned our ledger onto the existing rim, and that became the beam later on. So we kind of aligned with something that wasn't right anyway, so maybe it was half us, but regardless, I think the biggest lesson is that right before drywall, walk around with a straight edge and a laser and just check everything and do any furring or plating you need to do at that stage to save you all kinds of grief now, because this obviously would be a lot easier to fix before drywall. Just fur down all those the bottom cords of those trusses we made by a 1/2 inch, and that would actually put the sheetrock in line. But regardless, that's kind of the starting point. This is with an even 1-inch reveal onto the cabinets. So I think the first thing I'm going to try, we're going to put this side up 1/4 inch and see how that line looks. And if we can get it to look not ridiculous, then we might be able to roll this. Yeah, so I can roll this just fine if I'm only rolling it 1/4 inch. So let me get down and see if that taper is noticeable. 1/4 inch over, what is this, 11 feet? I mean, I know it's there. I don't know, that might be okay. So there's the reveal there. If we pan out and go over, I don't know, like that 1/4 inch kind of disappears compared to over here. And just for fun, I cut this one just to see how that's gonna fit in here. I think it's gonna be hidden completely just fine. So I think we will, I'm gonna tack that one up and get it kind of in place. And I wanna get my clamps and my blocks down and out of the way so I can get a better sight line on that cabinetry reveal, but I think it's looking pretty good. I think it's gonna work out just fine, and it's gonna save me a whole lot of heartache. I think it's gonna work out just fine. I can tell because I know it's there that this is a little bigger than over there, and it kind of tapers a little bit. I can visually see that, but I don't care. That's how I know it's good enough, because I don't care, and I think it looks just fine, and probably won't be able to notice. Okay, I'm gonna get this corner made up real quick, and then we'll start putting in the rest of the, we got 4 pieces left. Okay, that is it. All the crown is wrapped around here in the kitchen. So I'm gonna clean up a little bit, and I just have that one piece in the breakfast nook to install, and then we're done installing crown. It definitely looks weird with no ceiling gaps, that's for sure. So that is the crown all installed and out of the way, ready for the painter to come through, fill and caulk and spray it all and finish up 100%. Before I get around to that, I'm going to make the pantry door, so that's kind of off the list, and then we can spray it all out and be done with all of the trim in here, which would be super nice. So that's going to do it for this one. Thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments on the kitchen or whatever, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.